Hello, good evening, welcome to another Paratus video, or good morning, depending upon what time this launches. Topic of today's discussion, what to do after a defensive shooting. And it's a hot topic of discussion right now because there's been a noticeable uptick and increase in violent crime, whether it's farm attacks, violent home invasions, business robberies, or carjackings. Unless you're living under a rock, you've probably noticed that things have gotten progressively more violent and a lot more criminal as we're easing out of this 100-day protracted lockdown. And what a lot of people want to know is, what can they expect can happen to them if they use a firearm to defend themselves? In fact, what I'm about to tell you actually applies to any form of self-defense where the aggressor is either killed or injured. So just to get a couple of things out the way from the very start and very get-go, okay? If you believe your life to be under imminent, or the life of another innocent person, to be under imminent or present unlawful attack by a criminal, and that attack is life-threatening, you can do whatever needs to be done and use whatever is at your disposal to stop that attack. That means if you have to shoot a knife-wielding aggressor 5 times to stop the attack, then you have to shoot him 5 times, maybe 6. The difference between... Now, bear in mind, disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not legally trained. If you want legal advice, I highly recommend you go speak to a lawyer about this anyway. And if you are a lawyer and wish to correct me, please do. But bear in mind, okay, if the attack is stopped and the guy's lying there on the floor and you've shot him 6 times and his weapon's a meter away from him and he's no longer a threat, it's a bad idea and it's against the law to now continue shooting them, okay? That would be taking this too far. Common sense is a big part of this, but it's not that complicated. There are a lot of cases that you see in the news of people being accused of murder and ending up in court, or a murder docket is opened, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, another disclaimer, there's a lot of incompetence and laziness amongst members of the police service, amongst members of the National Prosecuting Authority, and that this ends up where victims are being prosecuted in courts for something that's actually clear-cut defensive shootings. This does not mean that those people are going to end up with prison sentences or with judgments against them. And in many cases, that has happened, like the elderly gent in Chabot last year or the year before that shot a knife-wielding aggressor in his house who attacked him. He was accused of murder. He went to court. The case got thrown out because guess what? He wasn't guilty of murder, and his actions were completely justified. So we mustn't get into some sort of bizarre panic about, defending ourselves. We mustn't get into a situation where we mentally hamstring ourselves and we already lose the battle before it even has begun. Ultimately, if you're going to stress too much about the consequences, legal or administrative or otherwise, of defending yourself, then that is going to prevent you from effectively defending yourself when you are put in a situation where a violent criminal attacks you. You do not have the luxury, folks, to worry about the administrative or legal process after the fact. When someone is trying to put a blade into your aorta right now, or if someone's trying to shoot you right now, or if someone's trying to rape someone in front of you, or even you right now, you cannot worry about what the court case process or what the investigating officer might think at that time. Right then, right there, you need to survive this encounter with as much of you intact as possible, and you need to do whatever you need to do to survive that encounter. We will worry about the legal stuff after the fact. So, going to talk a little bit about that tonight, just to kind of give you a vague idea of what you can and can't do. And I have a few suggestions on this as well. My first suggestion, go find a competent, highly acclaimed, highly recommended criminal defense attorney right now and get on their books as a client. Go book an appointment with them, or schedule a meeting and become their client. Have them on your speed dial, on your phone book, or whatever the heck it is you need, and make sure that you know where to find their number, and make sure other people know who your attorney is. That's going to save you a lot of grief in the long run, and you won't have to then find an attorney after the shooting happens or after the defensive incident happens, like I had to go find one when my defensive shooting happened about 5 years ago. So that's going to save you a lot of grief. It's worth paying the 300 or how many rand ever you need for a short consultation. Get on their books now. And believe me, a competent criminal defense attorney is worth their weight in gold. So don't skimp on this, because the only person you're going to cheat out of money or fool is yourself, unfortunately. Right, moving on swiftly from there. So let's say you've now had this violent encounter. I've written an article about this. It's linked in the description, by the way. You've now had your violent encounter. What are you going to do now? So you're going to be experiencing a couple of really horrible things. You've had an adrenaline dump. Your heart rate's through the roof. You're not concentrating. You're stressed. You might be hyperventilating. You might be struggling to maintain consciousness due to everything that's going on. There's a whole bunch of physiological and psychological things that are happening. Long story short, you're not really focusing on what you're doing. I remember for a fact after mine, I couldn't even figure out how to unlock my phone, even though it's something I've done numerous times a day, every day for years. However, try to keep it together enough. First things first, you may be injured. Other people might be injured. The guy you've just shot or done whatever to stop the attack might be injured if he's not dead. You need to first patch your holes, patch someone else's holes, do what you can, which is why I recommend, firstly, carrying a 2 key. As controversial as it is, carry one of those, understand how they work, understand their purpose. We'll do a separate vid on that, even though I have already. I'll link it in the description as well. Understand the purpose of it to stop arterial bleed so that you can get to the hospital as soon as possible before you die. Carry some basic first aid stuff on you, know how to use those. Okay, look after the bleedy parts first. Then call an ambulance or call for medical attention immediately. Explain to them roughly what happened, where you are, how to get there if you can, and that it's urgent. And this might take much longer than you anticipate. And I've heard some horror stories about trying to get medical attention on a scene like this. But that's your first port of call. Second port of call, after you called for an ambulance, call the police. Explain to them there's been a criminal incident, either shots have been fired or people are stabbed or whatever, where you are, who you are, and where they can find you. And keep it sparse. You're not in any condition now to start getting involved in long conversations and unpacking detail. That's something you worry about later. Okay. And then lastly, phone your lawyer. This is the third person you now call. Third thing, phone your defense attorney, explain to them what happened, either get them on scene or, make sure that they know what's happened so that they know who you are and where to find you if they need to find you. Now you kind of need to look after the crime scene a little bit here. Take note of where the brass is, where you stood, where other people are, who potential witnesses are. Make sure they don't run away and leave the scene and that evidence doesn't go missing. If you can do this at this point in time, take some photographs of everything to keep for yourself in case you need it. The crime scene photographers will do their part, but you need to understand that the integrity of that scene is highly important. Don't get people to come walk all over it, especially if you've got some overzealous neighborhood watch or CPF people or whomever. When the ambulance people arrive, they're going to need to do what they're going to need to do, but try and maintain the integrity of that scene as much as is humanly possible. Eventually, the police are going to arrive. And you're going to have to interact with the investigating officer who will introduce themselves to you. If they're professional, they're going to ask, well, who was the shooter or who was the defender or what happened? Now, again, and I'm going to quote here from the Masad Ayub school of thought, and I'm going to steal his advice. And I know that was aimed at the American, audience, but it is fairly well applicable to the South African one. It worked for me, and it worked for a hell of a lot of other people as well. Ultimately, right now, you are not in any condition to give detailed statements to the police about what happened. Believe me, you're not going to be in any emotional condition to do it. At the same time, you also don't want to be like, tell the cops, fuck you, I'm staying quiet, I've got nothing to say, because then they're probably going to arrest you as a suspect. So you need to fully cooperate without incriminating yourself. I had a very good investigating officer. He said to me straight, sir, I understand that you can't give a statement, and I would recommend against making any statements, but I vaguely need to know what happened on the scene. And it was very simple. I said, that guy over there attacked that guy over there with that knife, and I shot him to stop the attack. And that was it. Apart from that, they wanted some vague information, roughly where I was standing, to try and recover the brass, try and sort of reconstruct the positions of the scene. Very important. Do not lie to the cops. Do not try to plant evidence. Do not try to move evidence. Don't do any stupid things, because most of the time, these investigating officers have seen murder scenes. They've seen crime scenes for several years already. They're not stupid. They know when something's been tampered with. They know when you're lying to them. If you lie to them, they will arrest and charge you for defeating the ends of justice. I know a terrible story of a guy who did a shoot in his house, and it was a bad, messy shoot, and he ended up shooting the suspect in the back several times. Ultimately, that isn't what got him into trouble. What got him into trouble, he was never found guilty of that. He was found guilty for defeating the ends of justice because he tampered with the scene and he lied to the cops. So, important, do not lie. I cannot overemphasize this. Do not lie to the police, okay? What's then going to happen is they are going to do their thing. You might see crime scene photographers, forensic people are probably going to dust you for powder residue. They're going to dust other people for powder residue. Quite likely, they're going to ask you to please hand over your firearm and the license for it, because that's going to go for ballistic testing. Whether you like it or not, that's going to happen. It took 3 years for me to get mine back, which is why it's so important to have more than one handgun. That's why if you've got a Section 13 and a Section 15. Have at least one sport shooting handgun that you can use as a defensive gun in case you lose your Section 13 to ballistic tests. Okay, very important. You don't want to find yourself unarmed disarmed after an incident like this, because the cops are following their due process. Yes, it doesn't make sense if you admit that you did the shooting and you've explained everything and they still need to take your gun for ballistic testing, because frankly, you've already admitted that you've done it. So, but don't ask questions. Sometimes the system just doesn't make sense. That's going to happen. They're going to take your fingerprints and they'd want a copy of your ID document. Then they're going to probably leave the scene. You might get arrested. Hopefully not, because arrest is an extreme thing to have to put you through at that point. You're already highly distressed. Getting arrested is a really, really horrible thing right then to do to you. Not all police officers are particularly competent. Not all of them are particularly compassionate, right? Unfortunately. If you're arrested, that is not the end of the world. Fortunately, you already have legal counsel, right? You've already followed my advice and gotten yourself a good lawyer, and they know who you are and where you are and a bit of your backstory and where to find you, right? So you understand why this is important? Getting arrested is not the end of the world. Don't let that pressure you. Don't let anyone pressure you into making a statement on the scene. You've already explained to the police what's going on, and you've told them, it's something I should have added, that they will have your full cooperation within 24 to 48 hours as soon as you've met with your counsel. Okay? Your lawyer will give your statement to the police. You will speak to your lawyer, they will write it down, and they will give it to the police. And you'll cooperate with your legal counsel because they know how best to word these things. Again, this is why having competent defense counsel is important. Okay? They know the ins and outs of the system. You probably don't. A docket will then be opened. In many cases, it'll be an inquest docket. In many cases, as it wasn't mine, it was a murder docket. As a friend of mine at the National Prosecuting Authority has told me more than once, a docket is a docket is a docket. It doesn't matter what the docket is called. Okay, whether it's an inquest docket or a murder docket, it's treated the same. The media love making all sort of inaccurate, like fantastical claims, clickbaity stuff like suspects being investigated for murder. The suspect is quite likely not being investigated for murder. The event is being investigated. They just happen to say, hey, it's a murder docket. So don't let that stuff scare you off either. There's probably a lot more to this and quite a few more resources. You will find them linked in the description. I hope this has clarified one or two things for you, as far as this process goes. We will probably do follow-up videos on this. I'll probably do a follow-up live stream on this. Find the stuff in the description about what to do after the defensive shooting. Find that article. Find a link to how tourniquets work, the discussion I had with Walt Mayer on Wild Medics, and we'll do more discussions on emergency medical equipment that you should make part of your everyday carry. If you've liked this video, if you want to support Paratus, we have a Zapper and Snap Scan thing that's about to come up now in the credits section with the music. But this is Boeretrus coffee, thanks to the really cool guys at Boeretrus, which, they send me the coffee, which I'll be drinking in front of you shortly out of one of their mugs. If you buy their coffee, link is also in the description. I get some of that money, which is really cool of them. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this was informative. We can have more of these discussions. Chat to you guys soon. Stay safe out there. And if you'd want me to unpack anything further, leave me a comment. Okay, I do read them. I do respond to them, even though I'm terrible with WhatsApp and even worse with Facebook messages. Have a good evening, afternoon, morning, whatever this is. Bye-bye.